Okay, so in these two tutorials for Module 3, I'm going to go over some basic rigging techniques for the remainder of the character control overall, the mid-body control, the hips, the low back, mid-back, neck, head, and eyes controls. And the first tutorial will be a simple way of setting this up that employs a lot of the techniques we've already covered in the previous manual rigging tutorials. And I'm going to try my best to skip anything that we've already gone over in previous tutorials so that you can build upon your knowledge from those previous tutorials and apply it in these. And then the second tutorial will be a more advanced way of going about this setup. As you'll see here, some of the discrepancies between the axes of the control curves that we'll use and the axes of the joints that they will control make this a little bit cumbersome for the animator. So I'll show you a more advanced way to fix that issue for anyone that's interested in rigging as a potential career. But you don't have to use the more advanced way that will employ utilities to help switch some of those rotation values. But before we get into this, I want to make it clear that starting in Module 4, Week 4, when we begin skinning models to the skeletons, which will make the skeleton deform the model anatomically, and then in the future animation assignments, I would strongly advise that you stick strictly with human IK. It will be a much better and more intuitive rig to work with than anything you might create using these manual rigging tutorials that I've shared with you, or anything that you find online, or even anything that your instructor shows you, because it would take years to even approach the level of functionality that the human IK gives you almost instantaneously. And in a moment here, I'm going to show you how simple it is to set up the human IK as long as you went through the first week's tutorial correctly, setting up the skeleton so that it will fit inside your mesh when it's posed and you're ready to start skinning. All of the joints named correctly with all of the correct LRAs that we went over in that tutorial. It literally takes only a matter of seconds to set up the human IK rig. So here I have my A pose, which again is the more complex pose to set up than the T pose. This rig here represents the processes that I went through in the week 1 tutorial, setting up the locators, the curves, the temporary skeleton, and then the final skeleton. So I know that this skeleton will fit inside the mesh perfectly when it's posed and I'm ready to begin skinning. So to set up human IK, on your rigging menu set, if you haven't already initiated human IK, you simply click this button labeled human IK under the skeleton menu, and that tab will show up here over on the right. To complete the human IK rigging, I simply click the create character definition button, then select the hips joint, click the folder button to load the skeleton definition. And if you use the script that I shared with you to automatically rename the joints in your skeleton to the default human IK naming convention, or you use the names contained in that script to name the joints in your skeleton manually, all you have to do is choose the default human IK template. If you set everything up correctly, all of the joints are there, they're named correctly, the arms are parallel to the ground plane. You'll see this green check mark to indicate that the skeleton is ready to be rigged with human IK. If there are any issues, and often the problem is simply typos in naming the joints, which obviously is an easy fix, but if there are any of those issues, you'll get a message telling you which specific joint is named incorrectly, or if the arms aren't parallel to the ground plane, it will tell you that. So we'll give you feedback about what's wrong with your skeleton. But if you set up everything as we went over in that Module 1 tutorial, you'll get this check mark telling you that everything is set up correctly, and then all you have to do is click the Create Control Rig button, and that will set up the control rig for your character. And I've simply gone ahead and posed this character to fit inside my mesh, and I know, because I went through those processes of setting up the locators, the curves, the temporary skeleton, and then the final skeleton from the Module 1 tutorial, that it will fit perfectly inside my mesh, and I would be ready to start skinning this model. And human IK is just an incredibly functional rig. We'll go over it more in depth in Module 5. I can get back to the stance pose by clicking this button. Will get me back to the T pose that I used when I attached the control rig to the skeleton. I can hide the display of the IK, the FK, or the skeleton. There's full body mode, which allows you to use the full body IK so that when I move one of the arms, it will pull the entire body, or one of the legs, it will pull the entire body. Body part mode, which allows me to work with the body parts individually without without initiating the full body IK. I can pin the hands. So that the body in full body mode will push against that pinned hand. Do the same thing for the feet. There are floor contacts I can set up under the Human IK Properties tab for the feet. I'm just going to change the draw style to bone for some of these joints because when Human IK is initiated, it switches the draw style for many of the joints in the skeleton to none so that it's not so cumbersome to look at. I'm just going to show those bones so that you can see how the floor contacts allow the feet to rotate against the ground, which is really handy for walking because the foot will push against the ground so that you don't have to worry about lining up the bottom of the foot with the ground plane as you animate the character walking. So it's a really fantastic rig. It's the best rig on the market as far as I'm concerned, and I think it will help all of you create better character animations more quickly and have more time to edit and improve those animations going forward. But it's important that you have a clean file to go to that has just the skeleton that you set up following the Module 1 tutorial along with your character model, with none of the manual rigging that we went over in Module 2 or that we'll go over in the tutorials this week, because once we begin skinning in Module 4 and then continue with animation in the following modules, you're going to leave all of the manual rigging behind and work strictly with this Human IK rig. So make sure that you have a clean file with just the skeleton, named correctly, with all of the correct LRAs, ready to attach the Human IK rig so that you don't have to worry about removing any manual rigging from your files. If for some reason you saved over the file that you created for Module 1, you can download it again from the classroom and begin setting up the Human IK with that file. So now we'll move on to finishing up the manual rigging for the rest of the character. Okay, so here I've gone ahead and set up a bunch of control curves, and these are the same kind of curves that I created for the arm control and the foot control. The ones for the hip, the ones for the low back, mid back, and head are simply circles that I use by clicking the NURB circle button on my curved surfaces shelf. The others are simply squares. Now, one important point about the squares: if you click on the NURB square button here, you'll get a curve in the shape of a square, but what this actually is 4 curves that are grouped together. And that's not what you want for a control curve, because you want to be able to select one thing and get access to the attributes that you're looking to access as the animator. So you don't want to create the squares. If you want to use squares, you can use any shape that you want. Obviously, I created a custom shape for the foot. You could create custom shapes for every part of the control here. I simply use circles and squares, and I've rotated some of those squares so that they're differentiated from the others, and I'll show you in a second how to change the colors of the curves. But if you wanted to create a square, you'll want to go about it the same way we created the custom curve for the foot. So go to the EP Curve tool, make sure it's set to linear, and then you can use Grid Snap to create a square for yourself, or a rectangle, whatever you want. And that way you get one curve that's the square rather than the group of 4 curves which you get when you click the NURB square button on your shelf. But as I mentioned, I'm going to try to skip over the steps that we've covered in previous tutorials so that you're committing those to memory and getting comfortable building upon the knowledge from the previous tutorials. So I've simply set up a number of curves here that I've snapped to various joints or the ground plane. So the character control, and again, these names are ones that I've chosen. If you would like to choose ones that make more sense for you, you're welcome to do that. But the character control is snapped to the ground plane. That will control the overall character. So if you wanted to move the character to begin animating it at a different location or a different angle, you would use the character control. The mid-body control, hips control, low back, mid-back, head. I've added 3 neck attributes to control the rotation of the neck. We went over how to create custom attributes in a previous tutorial. I also created one for the jaw. And then I created a square with some locators for the eyes control, and we'll go over how to use an aim constraint to create the eyes control. So to change the color of these curves, you simply select any of the curves, go to the attribute editor, click on the tab for the shape, because again we talked about how every object, every element in your scene, including these curves, has a transform node, which would be this, and then a shape node underneath it. On the shape node, under object display, drawing overrides, you first have to check enable overrides, and then down here you have a slider that allows you to choose a different color, and sliding it back and forth will choose different colors. I simply chose yellow for this, blue for this, green, purple, orange. Those are entirely up to you, but changing the slider for any of these under the shape tab, once you've enabled overrides, will change the color, and that's simply the display of that color in the scene. Curves aren't renderable, so if I rendered my model I wouldn't see these curves anyway, and you want the animator to be able to see those curves to select the various controls on the character and change the attributes and animate the attributes without having to worry about hiding them to render the character. So these curves are not renderable. The colors simply change the display that you see in the view panel. I've also centered the pivot for all of these with the modify center pivot command. The character control is snapped to the ground plane. The mid body and hip controls are snapped to the hip joint. The low back control is snapped to the first spine joint. The mid back control is snapped to the middle spine joint. In my case that happens to be spine 3. If you have fewer or more joints in your spine chain, that'll be a different joint for you. The head control is snapped to the base of the skull. But the placement of the curves really doesn't matter too much because you're going to be controlling the joints with those curves, but it just makes sense to place them near the parts of the character that they're meant to control. And then obviously I scaled the curves to fit around my character. You want to consider how the animator is going to interact with these curves, so you want them to be large enough to fit around the character without the character passing through them or obscuring them in some way, but not so large that they might pass through other objects that might be in a scene in which the character will be animated, or the controls for another character that might be added to the scene. And then before you begin setting up the connections between the curves and the joints, you'll want to freeze their transforms, which we've gone over, and delete their history, because when you create a circle, for example, that circle will have a history node on it for controlling a number of spans in the circle and the radius, so you want to get rid of that history so that they're nice and clean when you start rigging them, and you simply do that by selecting any one of the curves and going to Edit, Delete by Type, History. And then I simply use the connection editor again, which we've gone over, to connect the control curves to the joints. Now, if we start with the low back here and look at the axes for this, we can see that X is forward and back, Z is side to side, and the Y is twist. But if we select the joints in the spine, because X always points down the bone, we can see that it's not the same axes, right? So X for the joint goes around in the twist direction, it's Y that goes front to back, and Z is also side to side. So when I connect these, I don't connect the rotate X of the low back curve to the rotate X of the first spine joint. I connected the rotate X of the low back control, which goes front to back, with the rotate Y of the spine joint, because that's the same direction. And then I connected the Y rotation of the low back control, which is the twist direction, to the X rotation of the spine joint, which is the one that goes around the twist direction. And then Z to Z, because those are the same, right? Z goes side to side on the curve, and Z also goes side to side on the spine joint. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the axes before you connect them, so that it makes sense that you're connecting not X to X and Y to Y and Z to Z, but the directions that the curve rotates and the directions that you want the spine joints to rotate, so that the same direction that you're rotating the curve will rotate that same direction of the spine joints, even if they aren't the same axes. So I simply connected the low back control to the first spine joint, which is spine, the second spine joint, which is spine 1, and the third spine joint, which is spine 2. So I went low back control rotate X to spine rotate Y, spine 1 rotate Y, and spine 2 rotate Y. And then low back control rotate Y to spine rotate X, spine 1 rotate X, and spine 2 rotate X. And then low back control rotate Z to spine rotate Z, spine 1 rotate Z, and spine 2 rotate Z. The same would hold true for the mid back control, except that I connected the mid back control rotations to the next 3 spine joints, so spine 3, spine 4, and spine 5. So it was mid back control rotate X to spine 3 rotate Y, spine 4 rotate Y, and spine 5 rotate Y. Mid back control rotate Y to spine 3 rotate X, spine 4 rotate X, and spine 5 rotate X. And then mid back control rotate Z to spine 3 rotate Z, to spine 4 rotate Z, and spine 5 rotate Z. For the head control, I added the neck X, neck Y, and neck Z attributes, simply with a default of 0 because I want them to control the rotation of the neck joints. And then I used the connection editor again to connect these neck attributes to the rotation of the neck and neck 1 joints. But again, I connected them based on how I want them to rotate visually, not necessarily the same axes. So the head control neck X attribute is connected to neck rotate Y and neck 1 rotate Y, and then the head control neck Y is connected to the neck rotate X and neck 1 rotate X, and then the head control neck Z is connected to the neck rotate Z and the neck 1 rotate Z, because those are the axes that I want them to control. And then the rotation of the head control are connected to the rotations of the head joint. But again, it's the head control rotate X is connected to the head rotate Y, the head control rotate Y is connected to the head rotate X, and the head control rotate Z is connected to the head rotate Z. I also created the jaw attribute, again with just a default of 0, and then I connected that attribute to the appropriate rotation of the jaw joint, which in my case is the Y rotation. And again, I use these visual separators to help divide some of the attributes from one another. That's a personal preference that I have as an animator, and a number of my animation clients have asked for. That's entirely up to you. These visual separate attributes don't do anything. I simply create them and lock them so that there's less of a chance of the animator accidentally working with the wrong attribute. Now for the eye controls, I'm going to use something called an aim constraint. And an aim constraint forces the constrained object to point at a specific target. And in this case, I first created a square with the method I showed you, right? Rather than clicking on the square button where you get those 4 grouped curves, I created my own continuous linear 1 square curve, scaled it so that it's about the same scale as the eyes, placed it so that it snapped to those eye end joints. Then I created 2 locators, and I snapped each of those locators to those eye end joints. I named the locators LI aim locator and RI aim locator. They're both parented to the eyes control curve, and again I named it eyes control, personal preference. You can name it anything you want. So these 2 locators, which are snapped to the eye end joints, are both parented to the eyes control curve, and the transformations have been frozen for all of these. So at their default positions, the curve and each of the locators are at 0 for translate, 0 for rotate, and 1 for scale. So the way that aim constraints work is you have an aim vector and an up vector. So I'll open up my aim constraint option box, and this is on your rigging menu set. The aim vector is determined by selecting the object or node that you want to constrain, and I'll set this up for the left eye first. Double clicking on the rotate tool and making sure that you have your axis orientation set to object rather than world or component. You want to make sure that's set to object. And then noting which axis is perpendicular to the circumference of the object or node that you want to constrain to. And in this case, it's the Z-axis, right? That's the one that goes around the circumference of the direction that I'm trying to point, right? I want to constrain to something that's going in this direction, right? Following that direction. And it's the axis, it's the object axis for that joint that goes around that direction. So in my case, it would be the Z. So that will be the aim vector. So whenever you're using an aim constraint, you want to select the object or joint, whatever it may be that you're trying to constrain, check its object rotation orientation, and find the axis that goes around the direction you're aiming to, right? So since I'm aiming to something that's pointing in this direction, I would choose the Z-axis. If I wanted to aim constrain it to something pointing out in this direction, it would be the Y-axis. If I wanted to constrain to something pointing up, it would be the X-axis. So that's how you determine the aim vector. So because I know my aim vector is the Z-axis, in my aim constraint options, and it's a good idea to reset the options in case you've used this before, I would want my aim vector to read 0, 0, 1 because it's X, Y, and Z. I'd want to be 0 for X, 0 for Y, and 1 for Z. The up vector is determined by selecting the object you want to constrain. In this case, it's my left eye joint again. Going into the Move tool, double-clicking on the Move tool settings, also making sure that you're in object orientation instead of world or component. And looking at which move axis is pointing at the direction you want to aim. So in my case, it's the X, right? I can see X is pointing to that locator that I want to constrain it to. So my up vector will be 1, 0, 0, because it's X, Y, and Z. So because I know that my object orientation with the Move tool shows that X is pointing to the direction I want to aim this, my up vector should be 1, 0, and 0. And it's important that you understand how to figure out these two vectors because they'll be different when you want to constrain different things, whether it's a character or objects that you're working on in a modeling project. The aim vector and the up vector will always be determined the same way by selecting the object that you want to constrain, checking which object rotation axis is going around the direction you're trying to aim to, and then looking at the object move axis is pointing in the direction you're looking to aim to. So you first select the object that you want to aim constrain to. So in my case, it would be the left eye aim locator. Shift selecting the object that you want to constrain. In this case, it's going to be my left eye joint. Click Maintain Offset, and then hitting Apply. And now I'll do the same thing for the right eye. Now I know that the aim and up vectors are going to be exactly the same because I mirrored these joints, but again, it's a good idea to check. So in that object orientation, in the Rotate tool, again, I can see that it's the Z-axis that's going around the direction that's pointing towards that locator. And then again, with the object orientation in the Move tool, I can again see that it's the X-axis that's pointing to that locator. So my aim vector would be 0, 0, 1, and my up vector would be 1, 0, 0. So select the locator first, shift select the right eye joint, maintain offset, and apply. And because these two locators are parented to this eyes control curve, now when I move the curve, which will also in turn move those two locators, you'll see that the eyes will rotate to look at these locators no matter where they go. And that's how an aim constraint works. So now I'm just going to go about parenting the control curves and some of the joints, and then locking and hiding those unwanted attributes. So I'm going to parent the hips joint to my hips control curve. I'm going to parent the left up leg dummy and the right up leg dummy to the hips control. And you'll see that there's a separation now between the hips and those dummy joints. And this creates what's called a broken rig. And it doesn't mean broken in the sense that it's not working, but broken in the sense that the joints are not continuous. And this is a very common technique in manual rigging, and you'll see that it works just fine, even though there's no longer a direct connection between the hips joint and those two dummy joints. I'm going to parent the first spine joint to the mid-body control. I'll parent the hips control to the mid-body control, and then parent the mid-body control to the character control. I'll parent the eyes control to the head control, and then I'll parent the head control to the head end joint. And that will just make sure that that head control curve, and I'm only going to use the rotation and the custom attributes for that, will move with the skeleton. And then lastly, parent the L foot to the character control. And now I'll just go about locking and hiding attributes that I don't want the animator to have access to. As I mentioned in an earlier tutorial, as a rigger, you don't want the animator to accidentally change or keyframe attributes that might break the rig. So typically you hide and lock those attributes so that the animator can't accidentally change those attributes or keyframe them. And now I'll just start to lock some of the attributes that I don't want the animator to have access to. So for the character control, I will lock and hide the scale and visibility. For the mid-body control, I'll lock and hide the translates, the scales, and the visibility. For the hips control, I'll lock the translates and then the scale and visibility. For the low back control, I'll lock and hide the translates, the scales, and the visibility. Same thing for the mid-back control. For the head, I'll lock the translates and the scale and visibility again. And then for the eyes control, I want to be able to move them left to right and up and down, but not forward, because I don't want that to get too far away from the eyes, and moving it back or forth doesn't change the direction that those eye joints are pointing in, so there's no reason to have that attribute open to the animator. And then I'll lock and hide the scales as well, but I'll leave open the X scale, because even though it's not a common thing to animate, you might in some occasions want to make the character cross-eyed, so I typically leave that scale X open. So I'll lock and hide the translate Z and the rotates, and then the scale Y and Z and visibility. And that's pretty much it. I didn't complete the right leg or right arm rigging, but if you wanted to complete the manual rig here, you would go through the same processes described in the arm and leg tutorials for the right arm and right leg to complete those, and then you would parent the R foot control to the character control as well. So now I would use the character control to move the character as a whole or rotate the character as a whole. The mid-body control, I'm going to hide my mesh here. The mid-body control will rotate the character from the hips up as a whole. The hips will rotate just the hips, right? So that would be used for motions where the hips are rocking independently of the upper body and the legs. And then for the low and mid-back control, you're going to see that the Y twists in the correct direction, the Z rotates side to side in the correct direction, but the X will be backwards. So when I rotate the X forward, the character will bend backwards. And when I rotate it backwards, the character will bend forward. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial that I'm going to show you how to use my utilities to fix that issue in the more advanced version of this for anyone that's interested. Because even though it's not difficult to understand, you would simply tell the animator that when they want to rotate the low and mid-back control to have the character curl forward, they would rotate that curve backwards, and to have the character curl backwards, they would rotate that curve forward. But it's an impediment to the animator, even if a minor one. So there is a way to go about fixing that, and I'll show that in the next tutorial. So the same would be for the mid-back control. The Y works as expected, the Z works as expected, but the X is backwards. Same thing for the head. So it'll rotate the head joint correctly in the Z and the Y, but backwards in the X. The neck will curl both the neck joints in each axis. And then I can move the eyes control to direct the eyes, or even cross-eyed with the scale. So if you were to complete the rigging for the right leg and the right arm, this would be a perfectly acceptable rig. It just wouldn't be anywhere near the level of functionality and ease of use of Human IK, and that's why I'm going to suggest that you stick with Human IK for the remainder of the course, because I think it will help you get better results, work faster, and have more time to focus on the performances that you want to create editing those performances, and hopefully come out of the course with some character animations that you might want to add to your reel or your portfolio.